Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we're going to start a brand new paper, paper 135, part one, John the Baptist, and this is on page 1496.1 of the original book, or 13501. So that's where we're starting. Let me forward the slides, and we'll get started here. Okay. John the Baptist. John the Baptist was born March 25th, 7 BC, in accordance with the promise that Gabriel made to Elizabeth in June of the previous year. For 5 months, Elizabeth kept secret Gabriel's visitation, and when she told her husband, Zacharias, he was greatly troubled and fully believed her narrative only after he had an unusual dream about 6 weeks before the birth of John. Accepting the visit of Gabriel to Elizabeth and the dream of Zacharias, there was nothing unusual or unnatural connected to the birth of John the Baptist.
Supernatural.
So remember that Gabriel visited Elizabeth. That's pretty important, isn't it? You think of the head of all the angels came down and visited Elizabeth. That's pretty impressive any way you look at it. So that was the first one. And this is a picture of John
That's cool looking.
preaching along the river. And this is a picture attributed to one of the great artists, I guess, of the birth of John. All right, Rodney, would you take the next one for us, please?
All right. On the 8th day, John was circumcised according to the Jewish custom. He grew up as an ordinary child, day by day and year after year, in the small village known in those days as the city of Judah, about 4 miles west of Jerusalem.
Okay, so they were only about 4 miles walking distance to Jerusalem. All right, as he grew up. Latch, how you doing? Would you take the next
Hi.
one?
Okay. The most eventful occurrence in John's early childhood was the visit, in company with his parents, to Jesus and the Nazareth family. This visit occurred in the month of June 1st, BC, when he was a little over 6 years of age.
Okay, so when he was about 6 years old, Jesus and his family visited John's family. So, and they were boyhood friends. During that period of time, they were young enough close enough to each other to enjoy each other's company. All right. After their return from Nazareth, John's parents began the systematic education of the lad. There was no synagogue school in this little village. However, as he was a priest, Zacharias was fairly well educated, and Elizabeth was far better educated than the average Judean woman. She was also of the priesthood, being a descendant of the daughters of Aaron. Since John was an early child, they spent a great deal of time on his mental and spiritual training. Zacharias had only short periods of service at the temple in Jerusalem, so that he devoted much of his time to teaching his son because he had extra time, right? Diane, you want to take the next one?
Zacharias and Elizabeth had a small farm on which they raised sheep. They hardly made a living on this land, but Zacharias received a regular allowance from the temple funds dedicated to the priesthood.
Okay, so since he was part of the priesthood, they got some stipend from the Jerusalem priesthood. Rodney, you take the next
one. 1. John becomes a Nazarite. John had no school from which to graduate at the age of 14, but his parents had selected this as the appropriate year for him to take the formal Nazarite vow. Accordingly, Zacharias and Elizabeth took their son to Engedi, down by the Dead Sea. This was the southern headquarters of the Nazarite Brotherhood, and there the lad was duly and solemnly inducted into this order for life. After these ceremonies and the making of the vows to abstain from all intoxicating drinks, to let the hair grow, and to refrain from touching the dead, the family proceeded to Jerusalem, where, before the temple, John completed the making of the offerings which were required of those taking Nazarite vows.
Hey, I'm in a meeting. I can't talk. I can't talk. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Rodney.
I finished.
Oh, okay. So John was taken down to Engedi, and he took his vows. And then when they came back, they made the necessary offerings during that period of time. And notice here it said that the Nazarites were to have no intoxicating drinks. Y'all talk for a minute. Let me see what this is about. Hello? Hello? Hi.
I wonder how long John's hair got.
Listen, I'm in a meeting. I can't talk. Thought that was where Mom was. She just called. Sorry, y'all. Everybody still there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So John was, my mother's in a nursing home, and I thought that was the nursing home calling because my mother just called. So, all right. So it was interesting that the Nazarites could not touch the dead. So even if their family died, they were not allowed to touch them and to bury them or anything else. So that was the job of the women during
So
that
it was,
period of time.
wonder how that came about.
I don't know, some
Superstition.
superstition about touching the dead, I guess, right? And they could not, they couldn't drink, and they were supposed to let their hair grow long. And the Nazarites in Jerusalem still do this today.
No kidding.
Yeah. So, okay. You just read?
I did.
You did. Okay, Letch, would you take the next one?
Okay. John took the same life vows that had been administered to his illustrious predecessors, Samson and the prophet Samuel. A life Nazarite was looked upon as a sanctified and holy personality. The Jews regarded a Nazarite with almost the respect and veneration accorded the high priest, and this was not strange, since Nazarites of lifelong consecration were the only persons, except high priests, who were ever permitted to enter the Holy of Holies in the temple.
Okay, that's kind of interesting too, isn't it? That they were the only ones that are allowed inside the Holy of Holies. And here's another picture, John.
What was in the Holy of Holies?
Something really holy.
I guess.
Like an old cloth, it had a lot of holes in it. I'm joking.
The ark wasn't. The ark wasn't there, right?
Huh? No, the ark was no longer there. Yeah, it hadn't been there for years. So originally that's where they stored the ark. And I guess when they removed the ark, it was just an empty room at that point, right? But they considered it the most holy place in the temple. It's kind of interesting that during Jesus, when he was a boy and went to Jerusalem, that was one of his questions: what was really in the Holy of Holies, right? So, all right.
The Nazarites still exist.
Yeah, I believe they still exist in Jerusalem today. Which is one of the Jewish sects.
Yeah,
so,
Hasidic or.
Yeah, they still let their hair grow long and that sort of thing too. Yeah. All right. John returned home from Jerusalem to tend his father's sheep and grew up to be a strong man with a noble character. All right, Diane.
Thank you. When 16 years old, John, as a result of reading about Elijah, became greatly impressed with the prophet of Mount Carmel and decided to adopt his style of dress. From that time on, John always wore a hairy garment with a leather girdle. At 16, he was more than 6 feet tall and almost full grown. With his flowing hair and peculiar mode of dress, he was indeed a picturesque youth, and his parents expected great things of their holy son, a child of promise and a Nazarene for life.
So 6 foot at
6 foot
16.
tall at 16. Yeah,
There.
Wow.
that's pretty tall. Must have looked
That's amazing.
like the Trump boy, right? You know,
Oh,
huge. You know, it's kind of funny. I was thinking of, I forget which one of the movies about Jesus, but the guy that played John the Baptist, famous actor, but he was only about 5'4", and I was thinking, well, he's kind of short for John the Baptist, but
the chosen?
yeah. Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
Yes. When 16 years old, John, as a result of reading about Elijah, we just read this.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I didn't change
Yes.
it.
Okay. Okay, 2. The death of Zacharias. After an illness of several months, Zacharias died in July AD 12, when John was just past 18 years of age. This was a time of great embarrassment to John, since the Nazarite vow forbade contact with the dead, even in one's own family. Although John had endeavored to comply with the restrictions of his vow regarding contamination by the dead, he doubted that he had been wholly obedient to the requirements of the Nazarite order. Therefore, after his father's burial, he went to Jerusalem, where, in the Nazarite corner of the women's court, he offered the sacrifices required for his cleansing.
So they even had to sacrifice things for things like if they touched the dead or something like that. So this, this sacrificial stuff was really out of hand, wasn't it? I mean, any way you look at it. So, Lech, would you take the next one?
Okay. In September of this year, Elizabeth and John made a journey to Nazareth to visit Mary and Jesus. John had just about made up his mind to launch out in his life work, but he was admonished not only by Jesus' words, but also by his example to return home to take care of his mother and await the coming of the Father's hour. After bidding Jesus and Mary goodbye at the end of this enjoyable visit, John did not again see Jesus until the event of his baptism in the Jordan.
And that was over 10 years later, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't a short period of time. So he had to show a lot of patience, even up to the time where he started his baptizing people along the Jordan. So that it had gone by about 9.5, almost 10 years before he could even start doing that. So John had to be really patient about this. Gary, would you take the next one, please?
I saw this coming.
Yeah.
John and Elizabeth returned to their home and began to lay plans for the future. Since John refused to accept the priest's allowance due him from the temple funds, by the end of 2 years, they had all but lost their homes. So they decided to go south with the sheep herd. Accordingly, the summer that John was 20 years of age witnessed their removal to Hebron in the so-called wilderness of Judea. John tended his sheep along a brook that was tributary to the greater stream which entered the Dead Sea at
Engedi.
Thank you. The Engedi colony included not only Nazareth of lifelong and long time and time period consecration, but numerous other ascetic herdsmen who congregated in this region with their herds and fraternized with the Nazarite Brotherhood. They supported themselves by sheep raising and from gifts which wealthy Jews made to the order.
So they got penance sometimes from wealthy Jews trying to help the Nazarites survive because they really lived in poverty. Okay, as the time passed, John returned less often to Hebron, while he made more frequent visits to Engedi, and so he was so entirely different from the majority of the Nazarites that he found it very difficult fully to fraternize with the Brotherhood. But he was very fond of Abner and an acknowledged leader and head of the Engedi colony.
3. The life of shepherds. Along the valley of this little brook, John built no less than a dozen stone shelters and night corrals, consisting of piled up stones, wherein he would watch over and safeguard his herds of sheep and goats. John's life as a shepherd afforded him a great deal of time for thought. He talked much about Edda, an orphan lad of Beth Seir, whom he had in a way adopted, and who cared for the herds when he made trips to Hebron to see his mother and to sell sheep, as well as when he went down to Engedi and Sabbath services. John and the lad lived very simply, subsisting on mutton, goats, milk, wild honey, and the edible locusts of that region. This, their regular diet, was supplemented by provisions brought from Hebron and Engedi from time to time.
A feast. You're muted, Roger.
Sorry. It's raining really hard out here, Rodney. So if we lose you, that's why. Okay. Go ahead.
Elizabeth kept John posted about Palestinian and world affairs, and his conviction grew deeper and deeper that the time was fast approaching when the old order was to end, that he was to become the herald of the approach of a new age, the kingdom of heaven. This rugged shepherd was very partial to the writings of the prophet Daniel. He read 1,000 times Daniel's description of the great image, which Zacharias had told him represented the history of the great kingdoms of the world, beginning with Babylon, then Persia, Greece, and finally Rome. John perceived that already was Rome composed of such polyglot peoples and races that it could never become a strongly cemented and firmly consolidated empire. He believed that Rome was even then divided, as Syria, Egypt, Palestine, and other provinces. And then he further read, quote, "In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And this kingdom shall not be left to other people, but shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." Another quote, "And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. This dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom never shall be destroyed. Another quote, and the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him.
And what kingdom are they talking about there?
The spiritual kingdom.
Yeah.
Spiritual kingdom, that's right. The kingdom of Jesus, which really has not come to pass completely yet, has it? Because we're still under quarantine from a rebellion which he quelled already.
The brotherhood of man.
Yeah. Letch, would you take the next one?
Okay. John was never able to completely to rise above the confusion produced by what he had heard from his parents concerning Jesus and by these passages which he read in the scriptures. In Daniel he read, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom. But these words of the prophet did not harmonize with what his parents had taught him. Neither did his talk with Jesus at the time of his visit when he was 18 years old correspond with these statements of the scriptures. Notwithstanding this confusion, throughout all of his perplexity, his mother assured him that his distant cousin, Jesus of Nazareth, was the true Messiah, that he had come to sit on the throne of David, and that he, John, was to become his advance herald and chief support.
And he did become his herald and chief support, but we know that Jesus did not sit on the throne of David, and that was not his mission, was it? Right? That was the belief during that period of time. That was not what he was supposed to do. Gary, would you take the next?
From all John heard of the vice and wickedness of Rome and the dissolution, I can't say that.
Dissoluteness.
Thank you. And moral barrenness of the empire, from what he knew of the evil doings of Herod and Antipas and the governors of Judea, he was minded to believe that the end of the age was impending. It seemed to this rugged and noble child of nature that the world was ripe for the end of the age of man and the dawn of the new and divine age, the kingdom of heaven. The feeling grew in John's heart that he was to be the last of the old prophets and the first of the new, and he fairly vibrated with the mounting impulse to go forth and proclaim to all men, repent, get right with God, get ready for the end, prepare yourself for the appearance of the new and eternal order of earth affairs, the kingdom of heaven.
So John was teaching that men needed to repent and get right with God because he really believed that Jesus was going to take over the world in the political sense on the throne of David and be the leader of the entire world. Now, an interesting part about this is this. Think about it this way. If the Sanhedrin had accepted Jesus as the Son of God, what would have happened? That's exactly what would have happened. Jesus would have been considered the head of the world as the Son of God. But since the Sanhedrin rejected him and murdered him, then that could never come to pass. Now, in other worlds, when the sons of God goes for their bestowal on other worlds, most worlds accept them as the Son of God. And so the whole political situation in those worlds changes almost overnight because they realize they have a Son of God, they have a Creator Son that's the head of their local universe that takes over the entire planet. That's what should have happened on this planet, but it didn't. So John was right in what he was doing. The way he approached it was a little bit different, but if it would have come out like it was supposed to, then it would have been totally different. All right.
Have you ever wondered if the Sanhedrin had not killed Jesus, how his life would have been and how he would have ended it?
Yeah, he would have basically led the world into a spiritual revolution, is what he would have done. And when his life ended, he would have literally given up his own life and died a normal death like we do, but it would have been his choice, and the way he died would have been totally his choice. He would have just given up his life force as a human and become a Urantia mortal, because we know he resurrected himself, right? So his death was not necessary on the cross. His death on the cross was a murder. Any way you look at it, that's the only thing you can call it, is it was a murder from evil men. And I just finished a video yesterday about this on chapter 9. So if you were watching at home, go listen to the new podcast on chapter 9. It says narrated by Dr. Roger Paul. And if you listen to that, it'll go into this in great detail. I did during this video. So it's a very good video to listen to. Okay.